Good afternoon, everyone. It is now time for us to conclude. After 16 remarkable days, we're going to finish now with our epic readathon of both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And now we're finishing up The Return of the King today. Thank you to all of our viewers who have been so faithful and staying with us since Christmas morning. I am your humble host and your humble reader, Clifford Broadway. It's nice to be back with you all again today. And thank you again to the hardworking crew of Shop XSN, the online network that has powered our efforts to do this. So, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry, after all of this, my voice is a little, but I'll do my best. This is The Return of the King, Book 6, Chapter 7, Homeward Bound. At last the hobbits had their faces turned towards home. They were eager now to see the Shire again, but at first they rode only slowly, for Frodo had been ill at ease. When they came to the ford of Bruinen, he had halted and seemed loth to ride into the stream, and they noted that for a while his eyes appeared not to see them or things about him. All that day he was silent. It was the 6th of October. "Are you in pain, Frodo?" said Gandalf quietly as he rode by Frodo's side. "Well, yes, I am," said Frodo. "It is my shoulder. The wound aches, and the memory of darkness is heavy on me. It was a year ago today." "Alas, there are some wounds that cannot be wholly cured," said Gandalf. "I fear it may be so with mine," said Frodo. "There is no real going back. Though I may come to the Shire, it will not seem the same, for I shall not be the same. I am wounded with knife, sting, and tooth, and a long burden. Where shall I find rest?" Gandalf did not answer. By the end of the next day, the pain and unease had passed, and Frodo was merry again, as merry as if he did not remember the blackness of the day before. After that, the journey went well, and the days went quickly by, for they rode at leisure, and often they lingered in the fair woodlands, where the leaves were red and yellow in the autumn sun. At length they came to Weathertop, and it was then drawing towards evening, and the shadow of the hill lay dark on the road. Then Frodo begged them to hasten, and he would not look towards the hill, but rode through its shadow with head bowed and cloak drawn close about him. That night the weather changed, and a wind came from the west, laden with rain, and it blew loud and chill, and the yellow leaves whirled like birds in the air. When they came to the Chetwood, already the boughs were almost bare, and a great curtain of rain veiled Bree Hill from their sight. So it was, near the end of a wild and wet evening, in the last days of October, the 5 travelers rode up the climbing road and came to the south gate of Bree. It was locked fast, and the rain blew in their faces, and in the darkening sky low clouds went hurrying by, and their hearts sank a little, for they had expected more welcome. When they had called many times, at last the gatekeeper came out, and they saw that he carried a great cudgel. He looked at them with fear and suspicion, but when he saw that Gandalf was there, and that his companions were hobbits, in spite of their strange gear, then he brightened and wished them welcome. "Come in," he said, unlocking the gate. "We won't stay for news out here in the cold and the wet, a ruffianly evening, but old Barley will no doubt give you welcome at the Pony, and there you'll hear all there is to hear." And there you'll hear later all that we say, and more, laughed Gandalf. How is Harry? The gatekeeper scowled. Gone, he said, but you'd best ask Barlaman. Good evening. Good evening to you, they said, and passed through, and then they noticed that behind the hedge at the roadside a long, low hut had been built, and a number of men had come out and were staring at them over the fence. When they came to Bill Ferny's house, they saw that the hedge was tattered and unkempt, and the windows were all boarded up. "Do you think you killed him with that apple, Sam?" said Pippin. "I'm not so hopeful, Mr. Pippin," said Sam, "but I'd like to know what became of that poor pony. He's been on my mind many a time, and the wolves howling and all." At last they came to the prancing pony, and that at least looked outwardly unchanged, and there were lights behind the red curtains in the lower windows. They rang the bell, and Nob came to the door and opened it a crack and peeped through. And when he saw them standing under the lamp, he gave a cry of surprise. "Mr. Butterbur, master!" he shouted. "They've come back." "Oh, have they? I'll learn them," came Butterbur's voice, and out he came with a rush, and he had a club in his hand. But when he saw who they were, he stopped short, and the black scowl on his face changed to wonder and delight. "Nob, you woolly-pated ninny!" he cried. "Can't you give old friends their names? You shouldn't go scaring me like that, with times as they are. Well, well, and where have you come from? I never expected to see any of you folk again, and that's a fact. Going off into the wild with that Strider and all those black men about. But I'm right glad to see you, and none more than Gandalf. Come in, come in. The same rooms as before. They're free. Indeed, most rooms are empty these days, and I'll not hide it from you, for you'll soon find it out soon enough. And I'll see what can be done about supper, as soon as may be, but I'm short-handed at present. Hey, Nob, you slow coach! Tell Bob. But there, I'm forgetting. Bob's gone. Gone home to his folk at nightfall now. Well, take the guests' ponies to the stables, Nob, and you'll be taking your horse to his stable yourself, Gandalf, I don't doubt. A fine beast, as I said when I first set eyes on him. Well, come in, make yourselves at home." Mr. Butterbur had, at any rate, not changed his manner of talking, and still seemed to live in his old breathless bustle. And yet there was hardly anybody about, and all was quiet. From the common room there came a low murmur of no more than 2 or 3 voices, and seen closer in the light of 2 candles that he lit and carried before them, the landlord's face looked rather wrinkled and careworn. He led them down the passage to the parlor that they had used on that strange night more than a year ago, and they followed him, a little disquieted, for it seemed plain to them that old Barlaman was putting a brave face on some trouble. Things were not what they had been, but they said nothing and waited. As they expected, Mr. Butterbur came to the parlor after supper to see if all had been to their liking. As indeed it had. No change for the worse had yet come upon the beer or the victuals at the Pony, at any rate. "Now, I won't make so bold as to suggest you should come to the common room tonight," said Butterbur. "You'll be tired, and there isn't many folk there this evening anyway. But if you could spare me half an hour before you go to your beds, I would dearly like to have some talk with you, quiet-like, by ourselves." "That is just what we should like too," said Gandalf. "We are not tired. We have been taking things easy. We were wet, cold, and hungry, but all that you have cured. Come, sit down, and if you have any pipe weed, we'll bless you." "Well, if you'd called for anything else, I'd have been happier," said Butterbur. "That's just a thing that we're short of, seeing how we've only got what we grow ourselves, and that's not enough. There's none to be had from the Shire these days, but I'll do what I can." When he came back, he brought them enough to last them for a day or two, a wad of uncut leaf. South Lynch, he said, and the best we have, but not the match of South Farthing. As I've always said, though I'm all for Brie in most matters, begging your pardon. They put him in a large chair by the wood fire, and Gandalf sat on the other side of the hearth, and the hobbits in low chairs between them. And then they talked for many times half an hour, and exchanged all such news as Mr. Butterbur wished to hear or give. Most of the things which they had to tell were a mere wonder and a bewilderment to their host, and far beyond his vision. And they brought forth few comments other than, "You don't say," often repeated in defiance of the evidence of Mr. Butterbur's own ears. "You don't say, Mr. Baggins, or is it Mr. Underhill? I'm getting so mixed up. You don't say, Master Gandalf. Well, I never. Who'd have thought it in our times?" But he did say much on his own account. Things were far from well, he would say. Business was not even fair. It was downright bad. No one comes nigh Bree now from the outside, he said, and the inside folks, they stay at home mostly and keep their doors barred. It all comes of those newcomers and gangrels that began coming up the Greenway last year, as you remember, but more came back later. Some were just poor bodies running away from trouble, but most were bad men, full of thievery and mischief. And there was trouble right here in Bree, bad trouble. Why, we had a real set to, and there were some folk killed dead. If you believe me. "I will indeed," said Gandalf. "How many?" "Oh, 3 and 2, said Butterbur, referring to the big folk and the little. There was poor Matt Heathertoes, and Rowley Appledore, and little Tom Pickthorn from over the hill, and Willie Banks from up away, and one of the Underhills from Staddle. All good fellows, and they're missed. And Harry Goatleaf that used to be on the West Gate, and that Bill Fernie, they came in on the stranger's side, and they've gone off with them, and it's my belief they let them in. On the night of the fight, I mean. And that was after we showed them the gates and pushed them out. Before the year's end it was, and the fight was nearly early in the new year, after the heavy snow we had. And now they're gone for robbers and live outside, hiding in the woods beyond Archet, and out in the wilds north away. It's like a bit of the bad old times tale to tell of, I say. It isn't safe on the road, and nobody goes far, and folk lock up early. We have to keep watchers all round the fence and put a lot of men on the gates at nights. Well, no one troubled us, said Pippin, and we came along slowly and kept no watch. We thought we'd left all trouble behind us. Ah, that you haven't, master. More's the pity, said Butterbur. But it's no wonder they left you alone. They wouldn't go for armed folk with swords and helmets and shields and all. Make them think twice, that would. And I must say, it put me aback a bit when I saw you. Then the hobbits suddenly realized that people had looked at them with amazement, not out of surprise at their return, so much as in wonder at their gear. They themselves had become so used to warfare and riding in well-arrayed companies that they had quite forgotten that the bright mail peeping from under their cloaks and the helms of Gondor and the mark and the fair devices on their shields would seem outlandish in their own country. And Gandalf, too, was now riding on his tall gray horse, all clad in white, with a great mantle of blue and silver over all, and the long sword, Glamdring, at his side. Gandalf laughed. Well, well, he said, if they are afraid of just 5 of us, then we have met worse enemies on our travels. But at any rate, they will give you peace at night while we stay. Oh, how long will that be? said Butterbur. "I'll not deny we should be glad to have you about for a bit. You see, we're not used to such troubles, and the rangers have all gone away, folk tell me. Oh, I don't think we've rightly understood till now what they did for us. For there's been worse than robbers about, wolves howling around the fences last winter, and there's dark shapes in the woods, dreadful things that it makes the blood run cold to think of. It's been very disturbing, if you understand me." "I expect it has," said Gandalf. "Nearly all lands have been disturbed these days, very disturbed. But cheer up, Barlaman. You have been on the edge of very great troubles, and I'm only glad to hear that you have not been deeper in. But better times are coming, maybe better than any you remember. The rangers have returned. We came back with them. And there is a king again, Barlaman. He will soon be turning his mind this way. Then the Greenway will be opened again, and his messengers will come north, and there will be comings and goings, and the evil things will be driven out of the wastelands. Indeed, the waste, in time, will be waste no longer, and there will be people and fields where once there was wilderness." Mr. Butterbur shook his head. "If there's a few decent, respectable folk on the roads, that won't do no harm," he said. "But we don't want no more rabble and ruffians. And we don't want no outsiders at Bree, nor near Bree at all. We want to be let alone. I don't want a whole crowd of strangers camping here and settling there and tearing up the wild country." "You will be let alone, Barlaman," said Gandalf. "There is room enough for realms between Isen and Greyflood, or along the shorelands south of the Brandywine, without anyone living within many days' ride of Bree. And many folk used to dwell away north, 100 miles or more from here, at the far end of the Greenway, on the North Downs, or by Lake Evendim." "Up away by Deadmen's Dyke," said Butterbur, looking even more dubious. "That's haunted land, they say. None but a robber would go there." "The rangers go there," said Gandalf. "Deadmen's Dyke, you say? So it has been called for long years, but its right name, Barlaman, is Fornost Irain, Norbury of the Kings, and the king will come there again one day, and then you'll have some fair folk riding through." "Oh, well, that sounds more hopeful, I'll allow," said Butterbur, "and it'll be good for business, no doubt, so long as he lets Bree alone." "He will," said Gandalf. "He knows it and loves it." "Does he now?" said Butterbur, looking puzzled. "Though I'm sure I don't know why he should, sitting in his big chair up in his great castle, hundreds of miles away, and drinking wine out of a golden cup, I shouldn't wonder. What's the pony to him, or mugs of beer? Not but what my beer's good, Gandalf. It's been uncommon good, since you came in the autumn of last year and put a good word on it, and that's been a comfort in trouble, I will say." "Ah," said Sam, but he says your beer's always good." "He says?" "Of course he does. He's Strider, the chief of the Rangers. Haven't you got that into your head yet?" It went in at last, and Butterbur's face was a study in wonder. The eyes in his broad face grew round, and his mouth opened wide, and he gasped. "Strider?" he exclaimed when he got back his breath. "Him with a crown and all, with a golden cup? Well, what are we coming to?" "Better times, for Bree, at any rate," said Gandalf. "Oh, I hope so, I'm sure," said Butterbur. "Well, this has been the nicest chat I've had in a month of Mondays, and I'll not deny that I'll sleep easier tonight and with a lighter heart. You've given me a powerful lot to think over, but I'll put that off until tomorrow. I'm for bed, and I've no doubt you'll be glad of your beds, too. Hey, Nob," he called, going to the door, Nob, you slow coach. Nob, he said to himself, slapping his forehead. Now what does that remind me of? Not another letter you've forgotten, I hope, Mr. Butterbur, said Meddy. Now, Mr. Brandybuck, don't go reminding me of that. But there, you've broken my thought. Now where was I? Nob, stables. Ah, that was it. I've something that belongs to you. If you recollect leaving his pony as you bought, well, it's here. Come back all of itself, it did. But where it had been to, you know better than me. It was as shaggy as an old dog and as lean as a clothes rail, but it was alive. Nobbs looked after it. What, my Bill? Cried Sam. Well, I was born lucky, whatever my gaffer may say. There's another wish come true. Where is he? Sam would not go to bed until he had visited with Bill in his stable. The travelers stayed in Bree all the next day, and Mr. Butterbur could not complain of his business next evening at any rate. Curiosity overcame all fears, and his house was crowded. For a while, out of politeness, the hobbits visited the common room in the evening and answered a good many questions. Bree, memories being retentive, Frodo was asked many times if he had written his book. Not yet, he answered. I'm going home now to put my in order. He promised to deal with the amazing events at Bree and so give a bit of interest to a book that appeared likely to treat mostly of the remote and less important affairs away south. Then one of the younger folk called for a song, but at that a hush fell, and he was frowned down, and the call was not repeated. Evidently there was no wish for any uncanny events in the common room again. No trouble by day, nor any sound by night, disturbed the peace of Bree while the travelers remained there. But the next morning they got up early, for as the weather was still rainy, they wished to reach the Shire before night, and it was a long ride. The Bree folk were all out to see them off, and were in merrier mood than they had been for a year, and those who had not seen the strangers in all their gear before gaped with wonder at them, at Gandalf with his white beard, and the light that seemed to gleam from him, as if his blue mantle was only a cloud over sunshine, and at the four hobbits, like riders upon errantry out of almost forgotten tales. Even those who had laughed at all the talk about the king began to think there might be some truth in it. Well, good luck on your road, and good luck on your homecoming, said Mr. Butterbur. I should have warned you before that all's not well in the Shire, neither, if what we hear is true. Funny goings-on, they say. But one thing drives out another, and I was full of my own troubles. But if I may be so bold, you've come back changed from your travels, and you look now like folk as can deal with troubles out of hand. I don't doubt you'll soon set all to rights. Good luck to you, and the oftener you come back, the better I'll be pleased. They wished him farewell and rode away, and passed through the west gate and on towards the Shire. Bill the pony was with them, and as before, he had a good deal of baggage, but he trotted along beside Sam and seemed well content. I wonder what old Barlaman was hinting at, said Frodo. I can guess some of it, said Sam gloomily. What I saw in the mirror, trees cut down and all, and my old gaffer turned out of the row, I ought to have hurried back quicker. And something's wrong with the South Farthing, evidently, said Meddy. There's a general shortage of pipeweed. Whatever it is, said Pippin, Lotho will be at the bottom of it. You can be sure of that. Deep in, but not at the bottom, said Gandalf, you have forgotten Saruman. He began to take an interest in the Shire before Mordor did. Well, we've got you with us, said Merry, so things will soon be cleared up. Oh, I'm with you at the present, said Gandalf, but soon I shall not be. I'm not coming to the Shire. You must settle its affairs yourselves. That is what you have been trained for. Do you not yet understand? My time is over. It is no longer my task to set things to rights, nor to help folk to do so. And as for you, my dear friends, you will need no help. You are grown up now. Grown indeed very high. Among the great you are, and I have no longer any fear at all for any of you. But if you would know, I am turning aside soon. I'm going to have a long talk with Bombadil. Such a talk as I have not had in all my time. He is a moss gatherer, and I have been a stone doomed to rolling. But my rolling days are ending, and now we shall have much to say to one another. In a little while, they came to the point on the east road where they had taken leave of Bombadil, and they hoped, and half expected, to see him standing there to greet them as they went by. But there was no sign of him, and there was a grey mist on the Barrow Downs, southwards, and a deep veil over the old forest far away. They halted, and Frodo looked south wistfully. I should dearly like to see the old fellow again, he said. I wonder how he is getting on. As well as ever, you may be sure, said Gandalf, quite untroubled, and I should guess not much interested in anything that we have done or seen, unless perhaps in our visits to the Ents. There may be a time later for you to go and see him, but if I were you, I should press on now for home, or you will not come to the Brandywine Bridge before the gates are locked. But there aren't any gates, said Merry. Not on the road. You know that quite well. There's the Buckland Gate, of course, but they'll let me through that at any time. There weren't any gates, you mean, said Gandalf. I think you will find some now, and you might have more trouble even at the Buckland Gate than you think. But you'll manage all right. Goodbye, dear friends. Not for the last time. Not yet. Goodbye. He turned Shadowfax off the road, and the great horse leapt the green dike that here ran beside it, and then at a cry from Gandalf, he was gone, racing towards the Barrow Downs like a wind from the north. Well, here we are, just the four of us that started out together, said Merry. We have left all the rest behind, one after another. It seems almost like a dream that has slowly faded. Not to me, said Frodo. To me, it feels more like falling asleep again. That's the end of that chapter, Homeward Bound. In another few moments, we will come up to the penultimate chapter in the entire Lord of the Rings, the Scouring of the Shire. We'll be back after this break. Just a moment. Thank you, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to our live Lord of the Rings and Hobbit readathon. And thanks again to Sean Astin for coming to read a guest chapter in The Two Towers. That was rich. That was really, really cool. Very, very nice indeed. And now we're at the penultimate chapter that was never filmed and has never existed in any adaptation of The Lord of the Rings by any director. Not Ralph Bakshi, not Peter Jackson. This is The Return of the King, Book 6, Chapter 8, The Scouring of the Shire. It was after nightfall when, wet and tired, the travelers came at last to the Brandywine, and they found the way barred. At either end of the bridge, there was a great spiked gate, and on the further side of the river they could see that some new houses had been built, two-storied, with narrow, straight-sided windows, bare and dimly lit, all very gloomy and un-Shire-like. They hammered on the outer gate and called, but there was at first no answer. And then, to their surprise, someone blew a horn, and the lights in the windows went out. A voice shouted in the dark, "Who's that? Be off! You can't come in. Can't you read the notice? No admittance between sundown and sunrise." "Of course we can't read the notice in the dark," Sam shouted back. "And if hobbits of the Shire are to be kept out in the wet on a night like this, I'll tear down your notice when I find it." At this, a window slammed, and a crowd of hobbits with lanterns poured out of the house on the left. They opened the further gate, and some came over the bridge. When they saw the travelers, they seemed frightened. "Come along," said Merry, recognizing one of the hobbits. "If you don't know me, Hob Hayward, you ought to. I'm Merry Brandybuck, and I should like to know what all this is about, and what a Bucklander like you is doing here. You used to be on the Haygate." "Oh, bless me, it's Master Merry, to be sure, and all dressed up for fighting," said old Hob. "Why, they said you were dead, lost in the old forest by all accounts. I'm pleased to see you alive after all." "Well, then stop gaping at me through the bars and open the gate," said Merry. "Oh, I'm sorry, Master Merry, but we have orders." "Whose orders?" "The chief's, up at Bag End." "Chief? Chief? Do you mean Mr. Lotho?" said Frodo. "Oh, I suppose so, Mr. Baggins, but we have to say just chief nowadays, the chief." "Do you indeed?" said Frodo. "Well, I'm glad that he has dropped the Baggins at any rate, but it is evidently high time that the family dealt with him and put him in his place." A hush fell on the hobbits beyond the gate. "Oh, it won't do no good talking that way," said one. "He'll get to hear of it. And if you make so much noise, you'll wake the chief's big man." "We shall wake him up in a way that will surprise him," said Merry. "If you mean that your precious chief has been hiring ruffians out of the wild, then we've not come back too soon." He sprang from his pony, and seeing the notice in the light of the lanterns, he tore it down and threw it over the gate. The hobbits backed away and made no move to open it. "Come on, Pippin," said Merry. "Two is enough." Merry and Pippin climbed the gate, and the hobbits fled. Another horn sounded. Out of the bigger house on the right, a large, heavy figure appeared against a light in the doorway. "What's all this?" he snarled as he came forward. "Gate breaking? You clear out, or I'll break your filthy little necks." Then he stopped, for he had caught the gleam of swords. "Bill Ferny," said Merry. "If you don't open that gate in 10 seconds, you'll regret it. I shall set steel to you if you don't obey. And when you have opened the gates, you will go through them and never return. You are a ruffian and a highway robber." Bill Ferny flinched and shuffled to the gate and unlocked it. "Give me the key," said Merry, but the ruffian flung it at his head and then darted out into the darkness. As he passed the ponies, one of them let fly with his heels and just caught him as he ran. He went off with a yelp into the night and was never heard of again. "Neat work, Bill," said Sam, meaning the pony. "So much for your big man," said Merry. "We'll see the chief later. In the meantime, we want a lodging for the night, and as you seem to have pulled down the bridge inn and built this dismal place instead, you'll have to put us up." "I'm sorry, Mr. Merry," said Hob, "but it isn't allowed." "What isn't allowed?" Taking in folk offhand like, and eating extra food and all that," said Hob. "What's the matter with this place?" said Merry. "Has it been a bad year or what?" "I thought it had been a fine summer and harvest." "Well, no, the year's been good enough," said Hob. "We grows a lot of food, but we don't rightly know what becomes of it. It's all these gatherers and sharers, I reckon, going round counting and measuring and taking off to storage. They do more gathering than sharing, and we never see most of the stuff again." "Oh, come," said Pippin, yawning. "This is all too tiresome for me tonight. We've got food in our bags just to give us a room to lie down in. It'll be better than many places I've seen." The hobbits at the gate still seemed ill at ease. Evidently some rule or other was being broken. But there was no gainsaying 4 such masterful travelers, all armed, and 2 of them uncommonly large and strong-looking. Frodo ordered the gates to be locked again. There was some sense, at any rate, in keeping a guard while ruffians were still about. Then the 4 companions went into the hobbit guardhouse and made themselves as comfortable as they could. It was a bare and ugly place, with a mean little grate that would not allow a good fire. In the upper rooms were little rows of hard beds, and on every wall there was a notice and a list of rules, capital R, rules. Pippin tore them down. There was no beer and very little food, but with what the travelers brought and shared out, they all made a fair meal, and Pippin broke rule number 4 by putting most of next day's allowance of wood on the fire. "Well now, what about a smoke? Well, you tell us what has been happening in the Shire," he said. "Oh, there isn't no pipeweed now," said Hob. "At least, only for the chief's men. All the stock seem to have gone. We do hear that wagon loads of it went away down the old road out of the South Farthing, over Sarn Ford, away. That would be the end of last year, after you left. But it had been going away quietly before that, in a small way. That Lotho—" "Now you shut up, Hob Hayward," cried several of the others. "You know talk of that sort isn't allowed. The chief will hear of it, and we'll all be in trouble." "He wouldn't hear naught if some of you weren't sneaks," rejoined Hob, hotly. All right, said Sam. "That's quite enough. I don't want to hear no more. No welcome, no beer, no smoke, and a lot of rules and orc talk instead. I hoped to have a rest, but I can see there's work and trouble ahead. Let's sleep and forget it until morning." The new chief evidently had means of getting news. It was a good 40 miles from the bridge to Bag End, but someone made the journey in a hurry. So Frodo and his friends soon discovered. They had not made any definite plans, but had vaguely thought of going down to Crick Hollow together first, and resting there a bit. But now, seeing what things were like, they decided to go straight to Hobbiton. So the next day, they set out along the road and jogged along steadily. The wind had dropped, but the sky was gray. The land looked rather sad and forlorn, but it was, after all, the 1st of November and the back end of autumn. Still, there seemed an unusual amount of burning going on, and smoke rose from many points round about. A great cloud of it was going up far away in the direction of the woody end. As evening fell, they were drawing near to Frogmorton, a village right on the road, about 22 miles from the bridge. They meant to stay the night. The Floating Log at Frogmorton was a good inn. But as they came to the east end of the village, they met a barrier with a large board saying, "No road." And behind it stood a large band of sheriffs with staves in their hands and feathers in their caps, looking both important and rather scared. "What's all this?" said Frodo, feeling inclined to laugh. "This is what it is, Mr. Baggins," said the leader of the sheriffs, a two-feathered hobbit. "You're arrested for gate-breaking and tearing up of rules and assaulting gatekeepers and trespassing and sleeping in Shire buildings without leave and bribing guards with food." "And what else?" said Frodo. "Well, that'll do to go on with," said the sheriff leader. "I can add some more if you'd like," said Sam, "calling your chief names, wishing to punch his pimply face, and thinking you sheriffs look a lot like tomfools." "There now, mister, that'll do. It's the chief's orders that you're to come along quiet. We're going to take you to Bywater and hand you over to the chief's men. And when he deals with your case, you can have your say. But if you don't want to stay in the lockholes any longer than you need, I should cut the say short if I was you." To the discomfiture of the sheriffs, Frodo and his companions all roared with laughter. "Don't be absurd," said Frodo. "I am going where I please and in my own time. I happen to be going to Bag End on business, but if you insist on going too, well, that is your affair." "Very well, Mr. Baggins," said the leader, pushing the barrier aside. "But don't forget, I've arrested you." "I won't," said Frodo. "Never. But I may forgive you. Now, I am not going any further today, so if you'll kindly escort me to the Floating Log, I'll be obliged." "Oh, I can't do that, Mr. Baggins. The inn's closed. There's a sheriff house at the far end of the village. I'll take you there." "All right," said Frodo. "Go on and we'll follow." Sam had been looking the sheriffs up and down and had spotted one that he knew. Hey, come here, Robin Smallburrow," he called. "I want a word with you." With a sheepish glance at his leader, who looked wrathful but did not dare to interfere, Sheriff Smallburrow fell back and walked beside Sam, who got down off of his pony. "Look here, Cock Robin," said Sam. "You're Hobbiton bred and ought to have more sense, coming away laying Mr. Frodo and all. And what's all this about the inn being closed?" "They're all closed," said Robin. "The chief doesn't hold with beer. Leastways, that's how it started. But now I reckon it's his men that has it all, and he doesn't hold with folk moving about. So if they will or they must, then they has to go to the sheriff house and explain their business." "You ought to be ashamed of yourself having anything to do with such nonsense," said Sam. "You used to like the inside of an inn better than the outside yourself. You were always popping in, on duty or off." "Oh, and so I would be still, Sam, if I could. But don't be hard on me. What can I do? You know how I went for a sheriff 7 years ago before any of this began. Give me gave me a chance of walking around the country and seeing folk and hearing the news and knowing where the good beer was. But now it's different. But you can give it up. Stop sheriffing if it has stopped being a respectable job, said Sam. We're not allowed to, said Robin. If I hear not allowed much oftener, said Sam, I'm going to get angry. Can't say as I'd be sorry to see it, said Robin, lowering his voice. If we all got angry together, something might be done. But it's these men, Sam, the chief's men. He sends them round everywhere, and if any of us small folk stand up for our rights, they drag him off to the lock-holes. They took old Flour Dumpling, old Will Whitfoot, the mayor, first. And they've taken a lot more. Lately, it's been getting worse. Often they beat them now. Then why do you do their work for them? Said Sam angrily. Who sent you to Frogmorton? No one did. We stay here in the big sheriff house. We're the first East Farthing troop now. There's hundreds of sheriffs all told, and they want more, with all these new rules. Most of them are in it against their will, but not all. Even in the Shire, there are some as like minding other folks' business and talking big. And there's worse than that. There's a few as do spy work for the chief and his men. Ah, so that's how you heard news of us, is it? That's right. We weren't allowed to send by it now, but they use the old quick post service and keep special runners at different points. One came in from Whitfurrows last night with a secret message, and another took it on from here. And a message came back this afternoon saying you was to be arrested and taken to Bywater, not direct to the lockholes. The chief wants to see you at once, evidently. Oh, he won't be so eager when Mr. Frodo has finished with him, said Sam. The sheriff house at Frogmorton was as bad as the bridge house. It had only one story, but it had the same narrow windows, and it was built of ugly, pale bricks, badly laid. Inside it was damp and cheerless, and supper was served on a long, bare table that had not been scrubbed for weeks. The food deserved no better setting. The travelers were glad to leave the place. It was about 18 miles to Bywater, and they set off at 10 o'clock in the morning. They would have started earlier, only the delay so plainly annoyed the sheriff leader. The west wind had shifted northward, and it was turning colder, but the rain was gone. It was rather a comic cavalcade that left the village, though the few folk that came out to stare at the get-up of the travelers did not seem quite sure whether laughing was allowed. A dozen sheriffs had been told off as escort to the prisoners, but Merry made them march in front, while Frodo and his friends rode behind. Merry, Pippin, and Sam sat at their ease, laughing and talking and singing, while the sheriffs stumped along, trying to look stern and important. Frodo, however, was silent and looked rather sad and thoughtful. The last person they passed was a sturdy old gaffer clipping a hedge. "Hello, hello," he jeered. "Now, who's arrested who?" Two of the sheriffs immediately left the party and went towards him. "Leader," said Merry, "order your fellows back to their places at once, if you don't want me to deal with them." The two hobbits, at a sharp word from the leader, came back sulkily. "Now, get on," said Merry, and after that the travelers saw to it that their ponies' pace was quick enough to push the sheriffs along as fast as they could go. The sun came out, and in spite of the chilly wind, they were soon puffing and sweating. At the 3 Farthing Stone, they gave it up. They had done nearly 14 miles, with only one rest at noon. It was now 3 o'clock. They were hungry and very footsore, and they could not stand the pace. "Well, come along in your own time," said Merry. "We are going on." "Goodbye, Cock Robin," said Sam. I'll wait for you outside the Green Dragon, if you haven't forgotten where that is. Now don't dawdle on the way." "You're breaking arrest, that's what you're doing," said the leader ruefully, "and I can't be answerable." "We shall break a good many things yet, and not ask you to answer," said Pippin. "Good luck to you." The travelers trotted on, and as the sun began to sink towards the white downs, far away on the western horizon, they came to Bywater by its wide pool, and there they had their first really painful shock. This was Frodo and Sam's own country, and they found out now that they cared about it more than any other place in the world. Many of the houses that they had known were missing. Some seemed to have been burned down. The pleasant row of old hobbit holes in the bank on the north side of the pool were deserted, and their little gardens that used to run down bright to the water's edge were rank with weeds. Worse, there was a whole line of the ugly new houses all along poolside, where the Hobbiton road ran close to the bank. An avenue of trees had stood there. They were all gone. And looking with dismay up the road towards Bag End, they saw a tall chimney of brick in the distance. It was pouring out black smoke into the evening air. Sam was beside himself. "I'm going right on, Mr. Frodo," he cried. "I'm going to see what's up. I want to find my gaffer." "We ought to find out first what we're in for, Sam," said Merry. "I guess that the chief will have a gang of ruffians handy. We had better find someone who will tell us how things are round here." But in the village of Bywater, all the houses and holes were shut, and no one greeted them. They wondered at this, but they soon discovered the reason of it. When they reached the Green Dragon, the last house on the Hobbiton side, now lifeless and with broken windows, they were disturbed to see a dozen large, ill-favored men lounging against the inn wall. They were squint-eyed and sallow-faced. "Like that friend of Bill Ferny's at Bree," said Sam. "Like many that I saw at Isengard," muttered Merry. The ruffians had clubs in their hands and horns by their belts, but they had no other weapons as far as could be seen. As the travelers rode up, they left the wall and walked into the road, blocking the way. "Where do you think you're going?" said one, the largest and most evil-looking of the crew. "There's no road for you any further. And where are those precious sheriffs?" "Coming along nicely," said Merry. "A little footsore, perhaps. We promised to wait for them here." "Garn, what did I say?" said the ruffian to his mates. "I told Sharkey it was no good trusting those little fools. Some of our chaps ought to have been sent." "And what difference would that have made, pray?" said Merry. "We are not used to footpads in this country, but we know how to deal with them." "Footpads, eh?" said the man. "So that's your tone, is it? Change it, or we'll change it for you. You little folk are getting too uppish. Don't you trust too much in the boss's kind heart. Sharky's come now, and he'll do what Sharky says." "And what may that be?" said Frodo quietly. "This country wants waking up and setting to rights," said the ruffian, "and Sharky's going to do it, and make it hard if you drive him to it. You need a bigger boss, and you'll get one before the year is out if there's any more trouble. Then you'll learn a thing or two, you little rat folk." "Indeed. Well, I am glad to hear of your plans," said Frodo. "I am on my way to call on Mr. Lotho, and he may be interested to hear of them, too." The ruffian laughed. "Lotho? Ha, ha, ha! He knows all right. Don't you worry, he'll do what Sharky says. Because if a boss gives trouble, we can change him, see? And if little folks try to push in where they're not wanted, we can put them out of mischief, see?" "Yes, I see," said Frodo. "For one thing, I see that you're behind the times and the news here. Much has happened since you left the South. Your day is over, and all other ruffians. The Dark Tower has fallen, and there is a king in Gondor, and Isengard has been destroyed, and your precious master is a beggar in the wilderness. I passed him on the road. The king's messengers will ride up the greenway now, not bullies from Isengard." The man stared at him and smiled. "A beggar in the wilderness?" he mocked. "Oh, is he indeed? Swagger it, my little cock-a-whoop. Ooh, but that won't stop us living in this fat little country where you have lazed long enough." And he snapped his fingers in Frodo's face. "King's messengers, that for them. When I see one, I'll take notice, perhaps." This was too much for Pippin. His thoughts went back to the field of Cormallen, and here was a squint-eyed rascal calling the ring-bearer a little cock-a-whoop. He cast back his cloak, flashed out his sword, and the silver and sable of Gondor gleamed on him as he rode forward. "I am a messenger of the king," he said. "You are speaking to the king's friend, and one of the most renowned in all the lands of the West. You are a ruffian and a fool. Down on your knees in the road and ask pardon, or I will set this troll's bane in you." The sword glinted in the westering sun. Merry and Sam drew their swords also and rode up to support Pippin, but Frodo did not move. The ruffians gave back. Scaring Breeland peasants and bullying bewildered hobbits had been their work. Fearless hobbits with bright swords and grim faces were a great surprise, and there was a note in the voices of these newcomers that they had not heard before. It chilled them with fear. "Go," said Merry. "If you trouble this village again, you will regret it." The three hobbits came on, and then the ruffians turned and fled, running away up the Hobbiton road, but they blew their horns as they ran. "Well, we've come back none too soon," said Merry. "Not a day too soon, perhaps too late at any rate to save Lotho," said Frodo. "Miserable fool, but I am sorry for him." "Save Lotho? Whatever do you mean?" said Pippin. "Destroy him, I should say." "I don't think you quite understand things, Pippin," said Frodo. "Lotho never meant things to come to pass. Lotho never meant things to come to this pass. He has been a wicked fool, but he's caught now. The ruffians are on top, gathering, robbing, and bullying, and running, or ruining things as they like, in his name, and not in his name even for much longer. He's a prisoner in Bag End now, I expect, and very frightened. We ought to try and rescue him." "Well, I am staggered," said Pippin. "If all the ends to our journey, this is the very last I should have thought of. To have to fight half-orcs and ruffians in the Shire itself, to rescue Lotho Pimple?" "Fight?" said Frodo. "Well, I suppose it may come to that. But remember, there is to be no slaying of hobbits, not even if they have gone over to the other side. Really gone over, I mean, not just obeying ruffians' orders because they're frightened. No hobbit has ever killed another on purpose in the Shire, and it is not to begin now. And nobody's to be killed at all if it can be helped. Keep your tempers and hold your hands to the last possible moment." "But if there are many of these ruffians," said Merry, "it will certainly mean fighting. You won't rescue Lotho or the Shire just by being shocked and sad, my dear Frodo." "No," said Pippin, "it won't be so easy scaring them a second time." They were taken by surprise. "You heard that horn blowing? Evidently there are other ruffians near at hand. They'll be much bolder when there's more of them together. We ought to think of taking cover somewhere for the night. After all, we're only 4, even if we are armed." "I have an idea," said Sam. "Let's go to old Tom Cotton's down South Lane. He always was a stout fellow, and he has a lot of lads that were all friends of mine." "No," said Merry, It's no good getting under cover. That is just what people have been doing, and just what these ruffians like. They will simply come down on us in force, corner us, and then drive us out or burn us in. No, we have got to do something at once. Do what? Said Pippin. Raise the Shire, said Merry. Now, wake all our people. They hate all this, you can see. All of them except perhaps one or two rascals and a few fools that want to be important, but don't at all understand what is really going on. But Shire folk have been so comfortable so long, they don't know what to do. They just want a match, though, and they'll go up in fire. The chief's men must know that. They'll try to stamp on us and put us out quick. We've only got a very short time. Sam, you can make a dash for Cotton's farm, if you like. He's the chief person round here and the sturdiest. Come on. I'm going to blow the horn of Rohan and give them all some music they have never heard before. They rode back to the middle of the village. There, Sam turned aside and galloped off down the lane that led south to Cotton's. He had not gone far when he heard a sudden horn call go up ringing into the sky. Far over hill and field it echoed, and so compelling was that call that Sam himself almost turned and dashed back. His pony reared and neighed. On, lad, on, he cried. We'll be going back up soon. Then he heard Merry change the note, and up went the horn cry of Buckland, shaking the air. Awake! Awake! Fear! Fire! Foes! Awake! Fire! Foes! Awake! Behind him, Sam heard a hubbub of voices and a great din and slamming of doors. In front of him, lights sprang out in the gloaming. Dogs barked. Feet came running. Before he got to the lane's end, there was Farmer Cotton, with 3 of his lads, young Tom, Jolly, and Nick, hurrying towards him. They had axes in their hands and barred the way. Nay, it's not one of them ruffians, Sam heard the farmer say. It's a hobbit by the size of it, but all dressed up queer. Hey, he cried, who are you, and what's all this to do? It's Sam Gamgee, I've come back. Farmer Cotton came up close and stared at him in the twilight. Well, he exclaimed, your face is no worse than it was, Sam, but I should have passed you in the street in that gear. You've been in foreign parts, seemingly. We feared you were dead. That I ain't, said Sam, nor Mr. Frodo. He's here and his friends, and that's the to-do. They're raising the Shire. We're going to clear out these ruffians. And their chief, too. We're starting now. Good, good, cried Farmer Cotton. So it's begun at last. I've been itching for trouble all this year. But folks wouldn't help. And I've had the wife and Rosie to think of. These ruffians don't stick at nothing. But come on now, lads. Bywater is up. We must be in it. Oh, what about Mrs. Cotton and Rosie? Said Sam. It isn't safe yet for them to be left all alone. My Nibs is with them, but you can go and help them if you have a mind, said Farmer Cotton with a grin. Then he and his sons ran off towards the village. Sam hurried to the house. By the large round door at the top of the steps, from the wide yard, stood Mrs. Cotton, and Rosie, of them, grasping a hay fork. It's me, shouted Sam as he trotted up. Sam Gamgee, so don't try prodding me, Nibs. Anyway, I've a mail shirt on me. He jumped down from his pony and went up the steps. They stared at him in silence. Good evening, Mrs. Cotton, he said. Hello, Rosie. Hello, Sam, said Rosie. Where have you been? They said you were dead. Ah, but I've been expecting you since the spring. You haven't hurried, have you? Perhaps not, said Sam, abashed, but I'm hurrying now. We're setting about the ruffians, and I've got to get back to Mr. Frodo, but I thought I'd have a look and see how Mrs. Cotton was keeping, and you, Rosie." "We're keeping nice, thank you," said Mrs. Cotton, "or should be, if it weren't for these thieving ruffians." "Well, be off with you," said Rosie. "If you've been looking after Mr. Frodo all this while, what do you want to leave him for as soon as things look dangerous?" This was too much for Sam. It needed a week's answer or none. He turned away and mounted his pony. But as he started off, Rosie ran down the steps. "I think you look fine, Sam," she said. "Go on now, but take care of yourself and come straight back as soon as you have settled the ruffians." When Sam got back, he found the whole village roused. Already, apart from many younger lads, more than 100 sturdy hobbits were assembled with axes and heavy hammers and long knives and stout staves, and a few had hunting bows. More were still coming in from outlying farms. Some of the village folk had lit a large fire just to enliven things, and also because it was one of the things forbidden by the chief. It burned bright as night came on. Others, at Mary's orders, were setting up barriers across the road at each end of the village. When the sheriffs came up to the lower one, they were dumbfounded. But as soon as they saw how things were, most of them took off their feathers and joined in the revolt. The others slunk away. Sam found Frodo and his friends by the fire, talking to old Tom Cotton, while an admiring crowd of Bywater folk stood round and stared. "Well, what's the next move?" said Farmer Cotton. "I can't say," said Frodo, "until I know more. How many of these ruffians are there?" "That's hard to tell," said Cotton. "They moves about and comes and goes. There's sometimes 50 of them in their sheds up Hobbiton way. But they go out from their roving round, thieving or gathering, as they call it. Still, there's seldom less than a score round the boss, as they names him. He's at Bag End, or was, but he don't go outside the grounds now. No one's seen him at all, in fact, for a week or two, but the men don't let no one go near." "Hobbiton's not their only place, is it?" said Pippin. "No, more's the pity," said Cotton. "There's a good few down south in Longbottom, and by Sarn Ford, I hear, and some more lurking in the woody end, and they've sheds at Waymeet. And then there's the lockholes, as they call 'em, the old storage tunnels at Mitchell Delving, that they've made into prisons for those as stand up to them. Still, I reckon there's not above 300 of them in the Shire, all told. Maybe less. We can master them, if we stick together." "Have they got any weapons?" asked Mary. "Whips, knives, and clubs, enough for their dirty work. That's all they've showed so far," said Cotton. "But I dare say they've got other gear if it comes to fighting. Some have bows, anyway. They've shot one or two of our folk." "There you are, Frodo," said Mary. "I knew we should have to come to a fight." "Well, they started the killing." "Not exactly," said Cotton. "Leastways not the shooting. Tooks started that. You see, your dad, Mr. Peregrine, he's never had no truck with this Lotho, not from the beginning. Said that if anyone was going to play the chief at this time of day, it would be the right Thane of the Shire and no upstart. And when Lotho sent his men, they got no change out of him. Tooks are lucky. They've got those deep holes in the green hills, the great smeals and all, and the ruffians can't come at 'em, and they won't let the ruffians come on their land. If they do, Tooks hunt 'em. Tooks shot 3 for prowling and robbing. After that, the ruffians turned nastier, and they keep a pretty close watch on Tookland. No one gets in or out of it now." "Good for the Tooks!" cried Pippin. "But someone is going to get in again now. I am off to the Smeals. Anyone coming with me to Tuckborough?" Pippin rode off with a half-dozen lads on ponies. "See you soon," he cried. "It's only 14 miles or so over the fields. I'll bring you back an army of tooks in the morning." Mary blew a horn call after them as they rode off into the gathering night. The people cheered. "All the same," said Frodo to all those who stood near, "I wish for no killing, not even of the ruffians, unless it must be done to prevent them from hurting hobbits." All right," said Merry, "but we shall be having a visit from the Hobbiton gang any time now, I think. They won't come just to talk things over. We'll try to deal with them neatly, but we must be prepared for the worst. Now, I've got a plan." "Very good," said Frodo. You make the arrangements." Just then some hobbits, who had been sent out towards Hobbiton, came running in. "They're coming," they said, "a score or more, but 2 have gone off west across country." "To Waymeet, that'll be," said Cotton, "to fetch more of the gang. Well, it's 15 mile each way. We needn't trouble about them just yet." Mary hurried off to give orders. Farmer Cotton cleared the street, sending everyone indoors, except the older hobbits who had weapons of some sort. They had not long to wait. Soon they could hear loud voices and then the tramping of heavy feet. Presently a whole squad of the ruffians came down the road. They saw the barrier and laughed. They did not imagine that there was anything in this little land that would stand up to 20 of their kind together. The hobbits opened the barrier and stood aside. "Thank you," the men jeered. "Now run home to your bed before you're whipped." Then they marched along the street, shouting, "Put those lights out! Get indoors and stay there, or we'll take 50 of you to the lockholes for a year. Get in, the boss is losing his temper." No one paid any heed to their orders, but as the ruffians passed, they closed in quietly behind and followed them. When the men reached the fire, there was Farmer Cotton standing all alone, warming his hands. "Who are you and what do you think you're doing?" said the ruffian leader. Farmer Cotton looked at him slowly. "I was just going to ask you that," he said. "This isn't your country, and you're not wanted." "Well, you're wanted anyhow," said the leader. "We want you. Take him, lads, lock holes for him, and give him something to keep him quiet." The men took one step forward and stopped short. There rose a roar of voices all around them, and suddenly they were aware that Farmer Cotton was not all alone. They were surrounded. In the dark, on the edge of the firelight, stood a ring of hobbits that had crept up out of the shadows. There was nearly 200 of them, all holding some weapon. Merry stepped forward. "We have met before," he said to the leader, "and I warned you not to come back here. I warn you again. You are standing in the light, and you are covered by archers. If you lay a finger on this farmer, or on anyone else, you will be shot at once. Lay down any weapons that you have." The leader looked around. He was trapped, but he was not scared, not now with a score of his fellows to back him. He knew too little of hobbits to understand his peril. Foolishly, he decided to fight. It would be easy to break out. "At 'em, lads!" he cried. "Let 'em have it!" With a long knife in his left hand and a club in the other, he made a rush at the ring, trying to burst out back towards Hobbiton. He aimed a savage blow at Merry, who stood in his way. He fell dead with 4 arrows in him. That was enough for the others. They gave in. Their weapons were taken from them, and they were roped together and marched off to an empty hut that they had built themselves, and there they were tied hand and foot and locked up under guard. The dead leader was dragged off and buried. "Seems almost too easy after all, don't it?" said Cotton. "I said we could master them, but we needed a call. You came back in the nick of time, Mr. Merry." "There's more to be done still," said Merry. "If you're right in your reckoning, we haven't dealt with a tithe of them yet. But it's dark now. I think the next stroke must wait until morning. Then we must call on the chief." "Why not now?" said Sam. "It's not much more than 6 o'clock, and I want to see my gaffer. Do you know what's come of him, Mr. Cotton?" "Oh, he's not too well and not too bad, Sam," said the farmer. "They dug up Bagshot Row, and that was a sad blow to him. He's in one of them new houses that the chief's men used to build while they still did any work other than burning and thieving, not above a mile from the end of Bywater. But he comes round to me when he gets a chance, and I see he's better fed than some of the poor bodies. All against the rules, of course. I'd have had him with me, but that wasn't allowed." "Thank ye indeed, Mr. Cotton, and I'll never forget it," said Sam. "But I want to see him. That boss and that Sharkey, as they spoke of, they might do a mischief up there before the morning." "All right, Sam," said Cotton. "Choose a lad or two and go fetch him to my house. You'll not have need to go near the old Hobbiton village over water. My jolly here will show you." Sam went off. Mary arranged for lookouts round the village and guards at the barriers during the night. Then he and Frodo went off with Farmer Cotton. They sat with the family in the warm kitchen, and the Cottons asked a few polite questions about their travels, but they listened. But hardly listened to the answers. They were far more concerned with events in the Shire. "It all began with Pimple, as we call him," said Farmer Cotton. "And it began as soon as you'd gone off, Mr. Frodo. He'd funny ideas, had Pimple. Seems he wanted to own everything himself and then order other folk about. It soon came out that he already did own a sight more than was good for him, and he was always grabbing more, though where he got the money was a mystery. Mills and malt houses and inns and farms and leaf plantations. He'd already bought Sandyman's mill before he came to Bag End, seemingly. Of course, he started with a lot of property in the South Farthing, which he had from his dad, but it seems he'd been selling a lot of the best leaf and sending it away quietly for a year or two. But at the end of last year, he began sending away loads of stuff, not only leaf. Things began to get short, and winter coming on too. Folk got angry, but he had his answer. A lot of men, ruffians mostly, came with great wagons, some to carry off the goods south away, and others to stay. And more came. And before we knew where we were, they were planted here and there all over the Shire, and were felling trees and digging and building themselves sheds and houses just as they liked. At first, goods and damage was paid for by Pimple, but soon they began lording it around and taking what they wanted. Then there was a bit of trouble, but not enough. Old Will, the mayor, set off for Bag End to protest, but he never got there. Ruffians laid hands on him and took him and locked him up in a hole in Mitchell Delving, and there he is now. And after that, it would be soon after New Year. There wasn't no more mayor, and Pimple called himself Chief Sheriff, or just Chief, and did as he liked, and if anyone got uppish, as they called it, they followed Will. So things went from bad to worse. There wasn't no smoke left, save for the men, and the chief didn't hold with beer, save for his men, and closed all the inns, and everything except rules got shorter and shorter. Unless one could hide a bit of one's own when the ruffians went round gathering stuff up for fair distribution, which meant they got it and we didn't. Except for the leavings, which you could have at the sheriff houses, if you could stomach them, all very bad. But since Sharkey came, it's been plain ruination. "Who is this Sharkey?" said Mary. I heard one of the ruffians speak of him. "Ah, the biggest ruffian of the lot, seemingly," answered Cotton. "It was about last harvest, end of September maybe, that we first heard of him. We've never seen him, but he's up at Bag End. And he's the real chief now, I guess. All the ruffians do what he says. And what he says is mostly hack, burn, and ruin. And now it's come to killing. There's no longer even any bad sense in it. They cut down trees and let 'em lie. They burn houses and build no more. Ugh. Take Sandyman's mill now. Pimple knocked it down almost as soon as he came to Bag End. Then he brought in a lot of dirty-looking men to build a bigger one and fill it full of wheels and outlandish contraptions. Only that fool Ted was pleased by that. And he works there cleaning wheels for the men, where his dad was the miller and his own master. Pimple's idea was to grind more and faster, or so he said. He's got other mills like it, but you've got to have grist before you can grind. And there was no more for the new mill to do than for the old. But since Sharkey came, they don't grind no more corn at all. They're always a hammering and a letting out a smoke and a stench, and there isn't no peace even at night in Hobbiton. And they pour out filth a purpose. They've fouled all the lower water, and it's getting down into Brandywine. If they want to make the Shire into a desert, they're going the right way about it. I don't believe that fool of a Pimple's behind all this. It's Sharkey, I say. That's right, put in young Tom. Why, they even took Pimple's old ma, that Lobelia, and he was fond of her, if no one else was. Some of the Hobbiton folk, they saw it. She comes down the lane with her old umbrella. Some of the ruffians were going up with a big cart. "Where be you a-going?" says she. "To Bag End," says they. "What for?" says she. "To put up some sheds for Sharkey," says they. "Who said you could?" said she. "Sharkey," says they. "So get out of the road, old haggling." "I'll give you Sharkey, you dirty thieving ruffians," says she, and ups with her umbrella and goes for the leader, near twice her size. So they took her, dragged her off to the lock holes, at her age, too. They've took others we miss more, but there's no denying she showed more spirit than most. Until the middle of this talk, into the middle of this talk came Sam, bursting in with his gaffer. Old Gamgee did not look much older, but he was a little deafer. "Good evening, Mr. Baggins," he said. "Glad indeed I am to see you safe back. But I've a bone to pick with you in a manner of speaking, if I may be so bold. You didn't never ought to have a sold Bag End, as I always said. That's what started all the mischief. And while you've been trespassing in foreign parts, chasing black men up mountains from what Sam says, though what for he don't make clear, they've been and dug up Bagshot Row and ruined my taters." "I'm very sorry, Mr. Gamgee," said Frodo, "but now I've come back, and I'll do my best to make amends." "Well, you can't say fairer than that," said the gaffer. "Mr. Frodo Baggins is a real gentle hobbit. I always have said, whatever you may think of some others of the name, begging your pardon, and I hope my Sam's behaved himself and given satisfaction." "Perfect satisfaction, Mr. Gamgee," said Frodo. "Indeed, if you will believe it, he's now one of the most famous people in all the lands, and they're making songs about his deeds from here to the sea and beyond the great river." Sam blushed, but he looked gratefully at Frodo, for Rosie's eyes were shining, and she was smiling at him. "It takes a lot of believing," said the gaffer, "though I can see he's been mixing in strange company. What's come of his waistcoat? I don't hold with wearing ironmongery, whether it wears well or no." Farmer Cotton's household and all his guests were up early next morning. Nothing had been heard in the night, But more trouble would certainly come before the day was old. Seems as if none of the ruffians were left up at Bag End, said Cotton, but the gang from Waymeet will be along any time now. After breakfast, a messenger from the Tookland rode in. He was in high spirits. "The Thane has razed all our country," he said, "and the news is going like fire all ways. The ruffians that were watching our land have fled south. Those that escaped alive, the Thane has gone after them to hold off the big gang down that way, but he sent Mr. Peregrine back with all the other folk that he can spare." The next news was less good. Mary, who had been out all night, came riding in about 10 o'clock. "There's a big band about 4 miles away," he said. "They're coming along the road from Waymeet, but a good many stray ruffians have joined up with them. There must be close on 100 of them. Excuse me. And they're fire-raising as they come. Curse them." "Ah, this lot won't stay to talk. They'll kill if they can," said Farmer Cotton. "If Tooks don't come sooner, we'd best get behind cover and shoot without arguing. There's got to be some fighting before this is settled, Mr. Frodo." The Tooks did come sooner. Before long they marched in, 100 strong, from Tuckborough and the Green Hills, with Pippin at their head. Mary now had enough sturdy hobbitry to deal with the ruffians. Scouts reported that they were keeping close together. They knew that the countryside had risen against them, and plainly meant to deal with the rebellion ruthlessly at its center in Bywater. But however grim they might be, they seemed to have no leader among them who understood warfare. They came on without any precautions. Merry laid his plans quickly. The ruffians came tramping along the east road, and without halting, turned up the Bywater road, which ran for some way sloping up between high banks with low hedges on top. Round a bend, about a furlong from the main road, they met a stout barrier of old farm carts upturned. That halted them. At the same moment they became aware that the hedges on both sides, just above their heads, were all lined with hobbits. Behind them, other hobbits now pushed out some more wagons that had been hidden in a field, and so blocked the way back. A voice spoke to them from above. "Well, you have walked into a trap," said Merry. "Your fellows from Hobbiton did the same, and one is dead, and the rest are prisoners. Lay down your weapons, then go back 20 paces and sit down. Any who try to break out will be shot." But the ruffians could not now be cowed so easily. A few of them obeyed, but were immediately set on by their fellows. A score or more broke back and charged the wagons. 6 were shot, but the remainder burst out, killing 2 hobbits, and then scattering across country in the direction of the woody end. 2 more fell as they ran. Merry blew a loud horn call, and there were answering calls from a distance. "They won't get far," said Pippin. "All that country is alive with our hunters now." Behind, the trapped men in the lane, still about 80, tried to climb the barrier and the banks, and the hobbits were obliged to shoot many of them or hew them with axes. But many of the strongest and most desperate got out on the west side and attacked their enemies fiercely, being now more bent on killing than escaping. Several hobbits fell, and the rest were wavering when Merry and Pippin, who were on the east side, came across and charged the ruffians. Merry himself slew the leader, a great squint-eyed brute like a huge orc. Then he drew his forces off, encircling the last remnant of the men in a wide ring of archers. At last all was over. Nearly 70 of the ruffians lay dead on the field, and a dozen were prisoners. 19 hobbits were killed, and some 30 were wounded. The dead ruffians were laden on wagons and hauled off to an old sand pit nearby, and there buried. In the battle pit, as it was afterwards called, the fallen hobbits were laid together in a grave on the hillside, where later a great stone was set up with a garden about it. So ended the Battle of Bywater, 1419, the last battle fought in the Shire, and the only battle since the Green Fields, 1147, away up in the North Farthing. In consequence, though it happily cost very few lives, it was a chapter to itself in the Red Book, and the names of all those who took part were made into a roll and learned by heart by Shire historians. The very considerable rise in the fame and fortune of the Cottons dates from this time, but at the top of the roll, in all accounts, stand the names of Captains Meriadoc and Peregrine. Frodo had been in the battle, but he had not drawn sword. And his chief part had been to prevent the hobbits in their wrath at their losses from slaying those of their enemies who threw down their weapons. When the fighting was over, and the later hours were ordered, and the later labors were ordered, Merry, Pippin, and Sam joined him, and they rode back with the Cottons. They ate a late midday meal, and then Frodo said with a sigh, "Well, I suppose it's time now that we dealt with the chief." "Yes, indeed. The sooner the better," said Merry. "And don't be too gentle. He's responsible for bringing in these ruffians, and for all the evil they have done." Farmer Cotton collected an escort of some 24 sturdy hobbits, "for it's only a guess that there's no ruffians left at Bag End," he said. "We don't know." Then they set out on foot. Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin led the way. It was one of the saddest hours in their lives. The great chimney rose up before them, and as they drew near the old village across the water, through rows of new, mean houses and along each side of the road, they saw the new mill in all its frowning and dirty ugliness. A great brick building straddling the stream, which it fouled with a steaming and stinking outflow. All along the Bywater Road, every tree had been felled. As they crossed the bridge and looked up the hill, they gasped. Even Sam's vision in the mirror had not prepared him for what they saw. The old grange on the west side had been knocked down, and its place taken by rows of tarred sheds. All the chestnuts were gone. The banks and hedgerows were broken. Great wagons were standing in disorder in a field beaten bare of grass. Bagshot Row was a yawning sand and gravel quarry. Bag End up beyond could not be seen for a clutter of large huts. "They've cut it down!" cried Sam. "They've cut down the party tree!" He pointed to where the tree had stood, under which Bilbo had made his farewell speech. It was lying lopped and dead in the field. As if this was the last straw, Sam burst into tears. A laugh put an end to them. There was a surly hobbit lounging over the low wall of the mill yard. He was grimy-faced and black-handed. "Don't 'ee like it, Sam?" he sneered. "But you always was soft. I thought you'd gone off in one of them ships you used to prattle about. Sailing, sailing. What did you want to come back for? We've work to do in the Shire now." "So I see," said Sam. "No time for washing, but time for wall propping. But see here, Master Sandyman, I've a score to pay in this village. And don't you make it any longer with your jeering, or you'll foot a bill too big for your purse." Ted Sandyman spat over the wall. "Garn," he said. "You can't touch me. I'm a friend of the boss's, but he'll touch you all right, and if I have any more of your mouth." "Don't waste any more words on the fool, Sam," said Frodo. "I hope there are not many more hobbits that have become like this. It would be a worse trouble than all the damage the men have done." "You are dirty and insolent, Sandy Man," said Merry, "and also very much out of your reckoning. We are just going up the hill to remove your precious boss. We have dealt with his men." Ted gaped, and for a moment he first caught sight of the escort that, at a sign from Merry, now marched over the bridge. Dashing back into the mill, he ran out with a horn and blew it loudly. "Save your breath," laughed Merry. "I've a better." Then, lifting up his silver horn, he winded it, and its clear call rang over the hill, and out of the holes and sheds and shabby houses of Hobbiton, the hobbits answered and came pouring out, and with cheers and loud cries they followed the company up the road to Bag End. At the top of the lane the party halted, and Frodo and his friends went on, and they came at last to the once beloved place. The garden was full of huts and sheds, some so near the old westward windows that they cut off all their light. There were piles of refuse everywhere. The door was scarred, the bell chain was dangling loose, and the bell would not ring. Knocking brought no answer. At length they pushed, and the door yielded. They went in. The place stank and was full of filth and disorder. It did not appear to have been used for some time. "Where is that miserable Lotho hiding?" asked Merry. They had searched every room and found no living thing save rats and mice. "Shall we turn on the others to search the sheds?" "This is worse than Mordor," said Sam. "Much worse in a way. It comes home to you, as they say, because it is home, and you remember it before it was all ruined." "Yes, this is Mordor," said Frodo, "just one of its works. Saruman was doing its work all the time, and even when he thought he was working for himself. And the same with those that Saruman tricked, like Lotho." Merry looked round in dismay and disgust. "Let's get out," he said. "If I had known all the mischief he had caused, I should have stuffed my pouch down Saruman's throat." No doubt. But you did not, and so I am able to welcome you home." There, standing at the door, was Saruman himself, looking well-fed and well-pleased. His eyes gleamed with malice and amusement. A sudden light broke on Frodo. "Sharky!" he cried. Saruman laughed. "So you have heard the name, have you? All my people used to call me that in Isengard, I believe. A sign of affection, possibly. But evidently you did not expect to see me here?" "I did not," said Frodo, "but I might have guessed. A little mischief in a mean way. Gandalf warned me that you were still capable of it." "Quite capable," said Saruman, "and more than a little. You made me laugh, you hobbit lordlings, riding along with all those great people, so secure and so pleased with your little selves. You thought you had done very well out of it all, and could now just amble back and have a nice quiet time in the country. Saruman's home could be all wrecked, and he could be turned out, but no one could touch yours. Oh no, Gandalf would look after your affairs." Saruman laughed again. "Not he. When his tools have done their task, he drops them. But you must go dangling after him dawdling and talking and riding round twice as far as you needed. Well, thought I, if they're such fools, I will get ahead of them and teach them a lesson. One ill turn deserves another. It would have been a sharper lesson, if only you had given me a little more time and more men. Still, I have already done much that you will find it hard to mend or undo in your lives, and it will be pleasant to think of that and set it against my injuries. Well, if that is what you find pleasure in, said Frodo, I pity you. It will be a pleasure of memory only, I fear. Go at once and never return. The hobbits of the villages had seen Saruman come out of one of the huts, and at once they came crowding up to the door of Bag End. When they heard Frodo's command, they murmured angrily, Don't let him go! Kill him! He's a villain and a murderer! Kill him! Saruman looked around at their hostile faces and smiled. Kill him, he mocked. Kill him, if you think there are enough of you, my brave hobbits. He drew himself up and stared at them darkly with his black eyes. But do not think that when I lost all my goods, I lost all my power. Whoever strikes me shall be accursed. And if my blood stains the Shire, it shall wither and never again be healed. The hobbits recoiled, but Frodo said, Do not believe him. He has lost all power, save his voice, that can still daunt you and deceive you if you let it. But I will not have him slain. It is useless to meet revenge with revenge. It will heal nothing. Go, Saruman, by the speediest way. Worm! Worm! Saruman called, and out of a nearby hut came Wormtongue, crawling almost like a dog. To the road again, Worm, said Saruman. These fine fellows and lordlings are turning us adrift again. Come along. Saruman turned to go, and Wormtongue shuffled after him. But even as Saruman passed close to Frodo, a knife flashed in his hand, and he stabbed swiftly. The blade turned on the hidden mail coat and snapped. A dozen hobbits, led by Sam, leapt forward with a cry and flung the villain to the ground. Sam drew his sword. No, Sam, said Frodo, do not kill him even now, for he has not hurt me, and in any case I do not wish him to be slain in this evil mood. He was great once, of a noble kind, that we should not dare to raise our hands against. He is fallen, and his cure is beyond us, but I would still spare him, in the hope that he may find it. Saruman rose to his feet and stared at Frodo. There was a strange look in his eyes of mingled wonder with respect and hatred. You have grown, halfling, he said. Yes, you have grown very much. You are wise and cruel. You have robbed my revenge of sweetness, and now I must go hence in bitterness and in debt to your mercy. I hate it, and you. Well, I go, and I will trouble you no more, but do not expect me to wish you health and long life. You will have neither, but that is not my doing. I merely foretell. He walked away, and the hobbits made a lane for him to pass, but their knuckles whitened as they gripped on their weapons. Wormtongue hesitated, and then followed his master. Wormtongue, called Frodo, you need not follow him. I know of no evil you have done to me. You can rest and food. You can have rest and food here for a while until you are stronger and can go your own ways. Wormtongue halted and looked back at him, half prepared to stay. Saruman turned. "No evil?" he cackled. "Oh, no. Even when he sneaks out at night, it is only to look at the stars. But did I hear someone ask where poor Lotho is hiding? You know, don't you, Worm? Will you tell them?" Worm tongue down and whimpered. "No, no." "Then I will," said Saruman. "Worm killed your chief. Poor little fellow, your nice little boss. Didn't you, Worm? Stabbed him in his sleep, I believe. Buried him, I hope, though Worm has been very hungry lately. No, Worm is not really nice. You had better leave him to me." A look of wild hatred came into Wormtongue's red eyes. "You told me to. You made me do it," he hissed. Saruman laughed. "You do what Sharky says, always, don't you, Worm? Well, now, he says, follow." He kicked Wormtongue in the face as he groveled and turned and made off. But at that, something snapped. Suddenly, Wormtongue rose up, drawing a hidden knife, and then with a snarl like a dog, he sprang on Saruman's back, jerked his head back, cut his throat, and with a yell ran off down the lane. Before Frodo could recover or speak a word, 3 hobbit bows twanged, and Wormtongue fell dead. To the dismay of those that stood by, about the body of Saruman, a gray mist gathered, and rising slowly to a great height, like smoke from a fire. As a pale, shrouded figure it loomed over the hill. For a moment it wavered, looking to the west. But out of the west came a cold wind, and it bent away, and with a sigh dissolved into nothing. Frodo looked down at the body with pity and horror, for as he looked it seemed that long years of death were suddenly revealed in it. And it shrank, and the shriveled face became rags of skin upon a hideous skull. Lifting up the skirt of the dirty cloak that sprawled beside it, he covered it over and turned away. "And that's the end of that," said Sam. "A nasty end, and I wish I needn't have seen it, but it's a good riddance." "And the very last end of the war, I hope," said Merry. "I hope so," said Frodo, and sighed. "The very last stroke. But to think that it should fall here, at the very door of Bag End? Among all my hopes and fears, at least I never expected that. I shan't call it the end. I shan't call it the end till we've cleared up the mess," said Sam gloomily. "And that'll take a lot of time and work." And that is the end of Chapter 8, The Scouring of the Shire. In a few moments, all my lads and lasses, we will return with the very final closing chapter of The Lord of the Rings, The Grey Havens. We'll be back in just a few moments. I'm so glad to have everybody with us this evening. This is the very end of our J.R.R. Tolkien readathon. The readathon that began well over 16 days ago on Christmas morning. And now we're right here. We're right here at the very last chapter. This is The Return of the King, Book 6, Chapter 9, The Grey Havens. The clearing up certainly needed a lot of work, but it took less time than Sam had feared. The day after the battle, Frodo rode to Mitchell Delving and released the prisoners from the lockholes. One of the first that they had found was poor Fredegar Bolger, fatty no longer. He had been taken when the ruffians smoked out a band of rebels that he led from their hidings up in the Brocken Boars by the hills of Scary. "You would have done better to come with us after all, poor old Fredegar," said Pippin, as they carried him out, too weak to walk. He opened an eye and tried gallantly to smile. "Who is this young giant with the loud voice?" he whispered. "Not little Pippin? What's your size in hats now?" Then there was Lobelia. Poor thing, she looked very old and thin when they rescued her from a dark and narrow cell. She insisted on hobbling out on her own feet, and she had such a welcome, and there was much clapping and cheering when she appeared, leaning on Frodo's arm, but still clutching her umbrella, that she was quite touched and drove away in tears. She had never in her life been popular before, but she was crushed by the news of Lotho's murder, and she would not return to Bag End. She gave it back to Frodo and went to her own people, the Bracegirdles of Hardbottle. When the poor creature died next spring, she was, after all, more than 100 years old. Frodo was surprised and much moved. She had left all that remained of her money and of Lotho's for him to use in helping hobbits made homeless by the Troubles. So that feud was ended. Old Will Whitfoot had been in the lockholes longer than any, and though he had perhaps been treated less harshly than some, he needed a lot of feeding up before he could look the part of mayor. So Frodo agreed to act as his deputy until Mr. Whitfoot was in shape again. The only thing that he did as deputy mayor was to reduce the sheriffs to their proper functions and numbers. The task of hunting out the last remnant of the ruffians was left to Merry and Pippin, and it was soon done. The southern gangs, after hearing the news of the Battle of Bywater, fled out of the land and offered little resistance to the Thane. By the year's end, the few survivors were rounded up in the woods, and those that surrendered were shown to the borders. Meanwhile, the labor of repair went on apace, and Sam was kept very busy. Hobbits can look like, hobbits can work like bees when the mood and the need comes on them. Now there were thousands of willing hands of all ages, from the small but nimble ones of the hobbit lads and lasses to the well-worn and horny ones of the gaffers and gammers. Before Yule, not a brick was left standing of the new sheriff houses or of anything that had been built by Sharkey's men. But the bricks were used to repair many an old hole to make it snugger and drier. Great stores of goods and food and beer were found that had been hidden away by the ruffians in sheds and barns and deserted holes, and especially in the tunnels at Mitchell Delving and in the old quarries at Scary, so that there was a great deal better cheer that Yule than anyone had hoped for. One of the first things done in Hobbiton, before even the removal of the new mill, was the clearing of the hill and Bag End, and the restoration of Bagshot Row. The front of the new sand pit was all leveled and made into a large sheltered garden, and new holes were dug in the southward face, back into the hill, and they were lined with brick. The gaffer was restored to number 3, and he said often, and did not care who heard it, "It's an ill wind as blows nobody no good, as I always say, and all's well as ends better." There was some discussion of the name that the new row should be given. Battle Gardens was thought of, or Better Smeals. But after a while, in sensible Hobbit fashion, it was just called New Row. It was a purely Bywater joke to refer to it as Sharky's End. The trees were the worst loss and damage, for at Sharky's bidding they had been cut down recklessly, far and wide over the Shire, and Sam grieved over this more than anything else. For one thing, this hurt would take long to heal, and only his great-grandchildren, he thought, would see the Shire as it ought to be. Then suddenly one day, for he had been too busy for weeks to give a thought to his adventures, he remembered the gift of Galadriel. He brought the box out and showed it to the other travelers, for so they were now called by everyone, and asked their advice. "I wondered when you would think of it," said Frodo. "Open it." Inside it was filled with a gray dust, soft and fine, in the middle of which was a seed, like a small nut with a silver shale. "What can I do with this?" said Sam. "Throw it in the air on a breezy day and let it do its work," said Pippin. "On what?" said Sam. "Choose one spot as a nursery and see what happens to the plants there," said Merry. "But I'm sure the lady would not like me to keep it all for my own garden, now so many folk have suffered," said Sam. "Use all the wits and knowledge you have of your own, Sam," said Frodo, "and then use the gift to help your work and better it. And use it sparingly. There is not much here." And Sam turned to Bywater, and so came back up the hill, as day was ending once more. And he went on. There was a yellow light and fire within, and the evening meal was ready, and he was expected. And Rose drew him in, and set him to his chair, and put little Eleanor on his lap. He drew a deep breath. "Well, I'm back," he said. And so ends our marathon reading of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to everyone at Shop XSN. And thank you to Professor Tolkien. Gets me every time. Have a good night, everyone. I am your reader, Clifford Broadway, signing off for tonight. Take care.